Hey there, it's Andrea, and welcome to the Voice of Influence podcast. Today I have with me Scott Trumpolt. Scott brings over 30 years of experience in compensation planning, HR leadership, and rewards strategies. After 18 years in corporate HR and compensation leadership roles across the US and Germany, he launched Trumpolt Compensation Design Solutions in 2012 to provide tailored, innovative solutions for organizations worldwide. Scott's experience spans market based pay structures, sales incentive plans, and job classification systems with a global reach. He has a master's degree in human resource management and is committed to delivering high impact strategies that align compensation with organizational success. Welcome to the Voice of Influence podcast, Scott.
Thank you, Andrea. It's a pleasure to be on.
I missed something in your bio because I couldn't actually say it, or at least I didn't know how to say it. So can you tell us what your certified global what?
Yes, Global Remuneration Professional. This is a certification that the World at Work, which you may have heard of, it's a certifying body, and
Okay.
they certify human resources professionals in a variety of areas, but particularly in the areas of benefits and in my area, compensation. And so the reason I took the Global Remuneration Professional GRP certification is because I come from a global background, whether I was working in the United States or in Germany or working on a project in China or the Latin America or the Caribbean. I knew that having that global perspective from a compensation perspective, because not all things are equal. There's a lot of uniformity, a lot of alignment in terms of how compensation is treated in different countries, but there are differences.
Hmm.
And so rather than taking the standard certified compensation professional, a lot of the same courses are taken, but I wanted to have the flavor of the global aspects. And so I took a series of exams, like any other certification program, and then that helped to launch my consulting career.
I see. That's very, very interesting. So I don't know. I don't think that we've ever had a conversation on the Voice of Influence podcast in almost 8 years about
Hmm.
compensation. And
Yeah.
that's the reason why I was like, yeah, let's get this guy to come on because I do think that that is a big concern for employers right now.
Mhm.
So I'm excited to get your wisdom on this topic. I'm curious, why is it important for people to understand kind of what you do and, this whole, bringing in a consultant to help with this? Why is that important for people to understand?
Well, I think the first thing to understand is it's not surprising that you haven't had a guest on. However, there are many of us. Some of them work directly within the corporate environment, or in a nonprofit organization, which is what I used to do. And then others of us are on the outside, but it really is something that lurks in the shadows. And a lot of people do get confused about it. They will say things to me, "Oh, you're in workers' compensation." I get that a lot. Or you're in finance. No, it's actually a function within the human resources department. The reason it's in the human resources department, yes, you use numbers, but you're dealing with human beings. You're
Mm,
dealing with their livelihoods. And essentially, if you boil down what I do, the reason it was kept in the shadows, if you've ever worked for a corporate organization, they don't tend to post their pay ranges. And different people get paid differently based on the market value of the job. And so my function, whether it's working in fixed pay like your base pay, or you're working in variable pay, trying to design a sales commission plan, what it all boils down to essentially is paying people for the value that they bring to the organization. And what's different now over the past few years is that there is a lot more movement. Employees want to have more transparency to their
mm,
pay. Obviously, and they know what they get paid.
mhm,
What the problem, as I see it, with the fact that there's new laws in some states about posting the broad range, is it's kind of a dead end for employees because they see what they're making, but okay, where do I go from here? You've told me how I compare roughly to the market value of my job, but this is where the whole idea of employee engagement comes in.
Yes. Since the pandemic, we've really noticed that the leverage has kind of shifted toward employees.
Hmm.
And in fact, in 2021, I wrote a paper called The Empowered Workforce about the importance of addressing and honoring an employee's personal agency so that they can be engaged and at work. And now, so I guess what I'm wondering is one of the big issues that we're hearing clients wrestle with is how do we keep up with this increasing expectation for compensation and benefits? And I don't know if are you hearing some of those concerns as well? Can we start there?
Well, certainly companies are very much zeroed in. They've always been zeroed in a sense to make sure they're at a market pay level, if a competitive market pay. What's missing from the equation that you're seeing is that employees want to know not just how they stand against the market, but how they can increase their pay. And in the area of employee engagement, think about it. Employees want more transparency to their pay, but what they're really often saying is, how do I get from the next step and grow? And that leads into a conversation of career development. Second piece, what about their manager? We've learned from employee engagement surveys that the immediate manager is the most important focal point to the employee. They're not going to go necessarily to human resources. They want to speak to their manager. But if their manager doesn't have the tools
Hmm.
to answer their questions about pay transparency, um, how do they get those tools? And then finally, just to wrap this piece up, there's the perception of human resources out there, part of it earned, that really what human resources is focused on is things like compliance and to teach managers how to properly discipline an employee and how to manage their performance. But if human resources wants to continue to become more of a strategic partner to the managers, they're the ones that need to provide the tools, career architecture, educating them about how you grow someone within the band, career development linked to pay structure. And Andrea, when that starts to happen, that relationship, that perception of human resources will change across the board. So it's those three levels of employee engagement: the employee, the employee's manager, and the perception of human resources working with management to get those questions answered for employees.
So, how do you address those three topics then? It sounds like we need to be thinking about each of those. Could we start with the first one?
Yeah, absolutely. That's really where I come in
Okay.
with with my services, because a lot of the times the people that they have in the organization that are doing compensation, it might be one or two people, again, lurking in the shadows. They're making sure that people get their merit increases, making sure that they get their bonuses. They're not payroll, but they're making sure that they're getting paid appropriate for their job. They don't really have the time to get more proactive sometimes and to build tools like with the employees. Okay, what we want to steer the employee with is a new direction within the culture. And that's what I can help with. For example, normally, if an individual is at the maximum of their pay range, they might get a lump sum merit increase, or they might be say, you're overpaid for this role. You're well above market, so you should be happy with, not exactly in these words, but that's the
Yeah.
thing. What if we can turn that around and say, you know what? The business has a need for you to grow. You need to add additional skills. We have a career architecture program Think about this for a minute, Andrea. If you're an accountant, there's no such thing in the market as just an accountant. There are different levels of an accountant, whether it's entry, intermediate, senior. We've got to get visible to employees, not so much how much they're making in comparison to the market or comparison to someone else in their organization, but here is where you are right now. How do we grow you based on business need? Because when you grow in the organization based on business need and you acquire additional skills and get better at the job you do, your market value increases. That's how you get more pay. And
Yeah.
then, and then from a career architecture standpoint, human resources gives the people leaders, the direct people leaders of those managers, this kind of information to work with because it changes the discussion. It's no longer when the employee comes in to talk to their manager, it's no longer, well, you're not getting much of a merit increase this year because you're well paid above the market. It's more about this is where you need to go. You've been here for 10 years in the organization. This is a pathway for you to grow into the organization. You might have to move laterally, you might, and that's the part that's not very transparent.
Mm,
And let me just say one other thing. I've worked with a lot of clients, and some of the ones that you see having 100 best companies to work for, guess what? They've done really well on their employee engagement results because this is something you can measure.
mm,
You do employee engagement, and if you ask the right questions, you can find out. So again, managers have the tools, employees understand them, they at least get an idea of how they can grow their career. It takes the emphasis off purely what I'm getting paid today and what can I be making tomorrow.
mm. That's a really good perspective. The shift from feeling like you've reached some sort of glass ceiling
Yes.
to realizing that there's a new path that you can start down. Is there always a new path, do you think?
Yes. Now, I was on a podcast and they asked this question in a different way than you did, but obviously, some companies are more well developed.
Mm-hmm.
They're bigger, they have more needs. But I have worked with companies, up to 5,000 employees, and I've worked with companies that have 100 employees. So the culture is a bit different, but the idea is they may need to grow in different ways. That's what I mentioned about going laterally. Sometimes the organization will say, look, you're a warehouse manager. We don't have things like a warehouse director. We really cap out at the manager level. Or, we don't have multiple levels of warehouse professionals. You know what? But if warehouse is part of logistics. So we're going to put you on a stretch assignment in another part of the company to learn an aspect of logistics. So it's how you manage it within the company. And I work with small warehouses. Sometimes you have to go to another division. You might have to, like I did. I felt like I had hit my cap about where I could go in the United States, and I went overseas for a little while in Germany to continue in that vein. Then I discovered other things, and that led me to want to be a consultant. But that's another story for perhaps another day. But the important thing is that, and I can't emphasize this enough, Andrea, it's very important that yes, everybody needs career development, but how you implement it is going to be different. You have to model it, customize it for the organization you're working with. The other thing is sometimes it's not all about a big formal program. Sometimes it means starting within the culture that you have and to say, what processes do we currently do where we can start to build this culture of transparency? So, for example, most companies, large or small, have a merit pay program. They review your performance once a year and decide what to give you for an increase. That's where this idea comes in of not sending the message, we're going to have to give you a lump sum. We can't add it to your base pay. This is where we start to say, hey, you've been here for 5 years. How do we grow you? What are the next steps? Managers want to do this, but they need the tools and they need to get them from somewhere. So that's me working with human resources to provide a market-based pay structure that's linked to career development. You hear
Mm,
this word total reward solutions?
mm,
That's linking career development and pay and other aspects. That's what total rewards is about.
Wow, that's very interesting. So, what difference have you noticed in companies once they have implemented something like that?
Well, I can tell you that it's only happened a few times because I've actually implemented career architectures and pay structures many times, and then you're paid and you're either retained to help see that project through. There's skill and then there's will. And understand that I think a lot of people may know this. Human resources generally tends to have the smallest budgets for new ideas because they're not a profit center, okay?
Mm,
They're not sales, they're not operations, but that's why they look to a consultant like me. They may not look at a big firm that's going to charge them an amazing amount of overhead that they can't afford. And I'm going to get to the essence of your question was when do I see it? And there have been times where the client has shown me engagement scores, and they've specifically brought me in because they noticed that compensation was uh, a black box, and then they saw improvements. Now, I'm not going to take all the credit for that, but that was the only initiative they made there. And that is the best feeling in the world. It's almost better than getting paid for a job. Obviously, we all have to survive, and you'd like to get paid, and you like to get paid for what you're worth. But there have been a few occasions where I've actually gotten back employee engagement service or just feedback from because I'm constantly asking human resources, how is this going over? Sometimes I even address employees, but I try and keep the link between human resources and management because I'm on the outside. I'm probably always going to be in the shadows, but I've seen results.
yeah. Oh, that's really gratifying to know that you made a difference for somebody.
It, well, it's everything in the world. I mean, when I was in the last days of my corporate career, just to transition to what I was doing now, the reason I did that, I felt my skills were atrophying a little bit because I was spending more of my time. How many employees may have told you this? It was burned out, but in a different way. It's like, okay, I'm managing people. I like mentoring them, but there's a lot of paperwork involved. There is a lot of project leadership and not a lot of doing compensation itself and not feeling that you're making a direct impact. I mean, every year I help to recommend thousands of pay increases. Nobody knows who I am. I'm not saying that I have all the power in the world. I don't. It's the company doing it. But I do help to provide advice. They will look to me to figure out, okay, what are other companies doing for merit increases?
Mm,
What are they doing in the areas of bonus? And so I'll help them get from point A to point B. Look, you've got some people that aren't even getting a bonus that should. You've got other people that are getting more than the market says. Here's the market perspective. So again, engagement starts with the consultant. I wouldn't have gone into this if I couldn't have been engaged. That's the first level of engagement is myself. And I'm glad I made that move 12 years ago.
mm. So I'm wondering, you also mentioned the HR function and the importance of being considered more of a strategic partner. But I'm wondering if you could speak to that. Like what do you envision? Like what do you think would be a better way for a company to utilize HR in compensation and think of them, you know, give them more power or more strategic oversight? What are you thinking?
Well, some of them are doing it. They're just redirecting it in a different way. Again, uh, having employees want to know more transparency to their pay is kind of a loaded issue. I think the future of human resources really is to make this idea of going from point A to point B. I think that's what employees, this is my opinion,
Uh-huh.
really want to know. They know what they make. They what they're really striving for is to have more transparency from human resources about how to grow their career. Human resources has a career development. Human resources does not do a very good job of promoting itself. I
I
worked
agree. Yeah.
I worked in a corporate organization where there was a benefits department that had kept the benefits cost, the premium cost, down by the company continuing to pay more of the premium. And in a lot of companies, as you know, everybody's insurance premium goes up every year. But they had held the line for 3 years. And I'm like, why aren't you advertising this? Why aren't you take, sometimes you got to take a victory lap and you have to give a pat on the back. So where a lot of the things that human resources has to do, like compliance and performance management and working on issues with employees who aren't performing, those aren't really things that are viewed as positive by employees. But HR needs tools that they can, the best way I can answer that is they need to promote. I had one client that they put everything about career architecture out on a learning module that employees could go in, take these tests on compensation, and to score it. They did a huge rollout of this. Now every company's different in terms of how transparent they want to be, but again, you're not focusing on individuals' pays. You're not breaking confidentiality or anything like that. You're giving them tools to grab onto so they start to think about, okay, I am a warehouse manager. I can't go any far, but warehouses and logistics. How can I get a stretch assignment? How can I move laterally? Sometimes you have to move laterally and not all upward. And also the other thing that uh, being transparent about career architecture, which is very important, Andrea, is to make sure that employees understand that it's a dual career path. You can grow as an individual contributor as well as a people leader. Some people don't want to be people leaders and they get forced into it. They want to continue to grow to be a subject matter expert, where right now they're a senior professional. How do we get them there? And guess what? You get paid the same as a director, pretty much.
Mm.
Okay. So you can grow your pay vertically or laterally. You can move upward in the organization as a people leader or as a professional, but that's got to be transparent. And that's where the kind of tools eventually it needs to get down to the employee. Yes, the employee. All of this information. Now, you structure the audience, what the audience is. Obviously, the managers are the ones that really need the training so they can help their employees. So that's part of it. HR needs to be the subject matter expert, and then finally bring the employees in. And then with the employees, start, like I said earlier, with your current culture. You're having employees already coming in to have their performance review. Use that as, what does the future look like? This is static. This is dead. This is what you did last year. Make it part of a lot of companies now are putting a lot more career development verbiage into their and training into their performance review. Okay, this is what we're going to do next year. So it has to become part of the culture, and you have to grab onto tools that employees are already familiar with, but you're changing the dialogue and you're visually presenting something that's different.
Yeah. Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. Kind of the theme of what you've been saying is that we need to acknowledge what is really happening. So, for example, you're talking about transparency with pay and whatnot, but also and then the career architecture, but also the the HR professionals being able to acknowledge when they have done something like hold the line on the, I think you said insurance premium, continuing to keep that at the same place for multiple years when it does continue to go up. They're doing something about that. And like you said, people don't know the meaning of that. They don't know to care. They don't know to appreciate it if they don't know about it.
Yeah. The other thing, when you say they don't know about it, this is not rocket science, what I'm about to describe, but a lot of companies from a comp and ben perspective will do total reward statements. And because a lot of employees aren't aware how much the employee is contributing to their health and welfare, the different programs, tuition reimbursement, what the cost is every year, the total compensation cost. And believe it or not, I don't get into that much, a little bit, because it's more accounting benefits related in terms of the costs. I am more about figuring out ultimately what to pay people for their job and what they can expect in the future. So one of the things about my solutions is that when I build a pay structure, for example, I don't just build that pay structure based upon the jobs that they have today. I make sure that that structure can live for 20, 15, 20 years or more because I market, as I said earlier, there's no such thing as just an accountant. I market price all the different levels of accountant from entry all the way up to expert advisor. And to make sure that the structure is robust in a sense that all the possibilities are included. At first,
Mm,
it was a little hard to get this mindset going internally with some smaller companies, but then they started to grow and they started to either become acquired or they acquired and they brought in more employees and their needs changed. So I build everything up front. So then you can have that discussion about career development.
yeah. So I wonder if you could take the perspective of the employee for a minute
Mhm.
and tell us, what do they need to do to come to a conversation about their compensation and show up as somebody that's credible and, is really able to advocate for what they want while at the same time understanding kind of the situation. Do you know what I mean? Like sometimes I think
Yes, I
an
do know what you
okay,
mean.
I'll just let you go ahead and answer the question then.
It's very difficult, but human resources, employees, that is, may go out to Glassdoor and they'll read different things.
Yeah.
They might go out to a free site and to get information about how much their job gets paid. Of course, the free ones don't give you all the background about how the sample size and all the different things that, for example, that I have access to and I pay a lot of money for. That's part of my
Mhm.
overhead. But the first thing I would advise always, the other thing is, and I've talked to employees, a lot of them are afraid to go into human resources to even talk to them. Their first stop, really going back to the idea of employee engagement,
Mm. The manager.
is the direct manager.
Yeah.
And before the manager even gets the direct tools, how I would phrase it with the employee is to go in and say, I've been here for 5 years. Obviously, you know what I'm getting paid, Mr. and Mrs. Manager, Miss Manager. I think the question is, what skills do I need to obtain to grow? And to also have an understanding themselves, because the employee has to take responsibility in this too. And I think the employee has to do two things. One, say they're currently an internal auditor. Do they want to stay on that pathway, or do they want to become ultimately a director of internal audit? They're working with a director of internal audit. And a manager, certainly, and the director of internal audit, they're supposed to spend some of their time figuring out about uh, creating bench strength for their organization because they're not going to be there forever. But having said that, the employee needs to talk to the manager and says, how do I grow my pay? What skills? And the manager, even if the manager is not a compensation expert and don't expect them to be, they should at least have a horizon in their head. They have better access. They're in different types of meetings where they can say what the company's going to need down the road. So that's the first question the employee asks is, how can I grow my pay? And secondly, I think the other big question that they need to say is, what are their desires? Do they want to continue to be an internal auditor? Do they want to be a director, or do they want to move into controlling or some other part of finance? And ultimately, what I want to see happen is those questions answers is the manager to say, here are our career families. This is what each of our career families does, and it's linked to the market. So, for example, auditing does not pay as much as cost accounting. even though the jobs could. This is one thing that people don't understand. They may think, hey, I'm a senior level professional. I should get paid the same as a senior level professional in software development. But the answer is no. Different jobs pay differently, even at the same level in the market. So I think that the employee has to ask those two questions. What skills do I need and where do I want to go? The manager then can turn around and help foster that idea. It's like when you went to a guidance counselor in high school and you weren't sure what you wanted to know to do. And the guidance counselor would look at current skill set if you had displayed any. And then they say, well, have you thought about this? Have you thought about this? And if a manager, if they go in to see the internal audit director, who's their direct manager, and say, these are the needs of internal auditing going forward, these are the skills you're going to need, then they can develop that person. Part of management, people management, is definitely development. And we're seeing that more and more over the years, less about controlling behaviors and making sure that employees are, all these compliance things, to at least include the growth and development part. So that's part that. So those are the two questions the employee needs to ask, and then the manager needs to further that, and
Mm.
that's where HR needs to provide the tools. And by the way, I mentioned that employee engagement. One of the things is for HR to strengthen their perception with the business unit. Well, if you start being proactive instead of just reactive, that's going to go a long way. Because a lot of the times, what the manager will say is that, I just lost two employees to another company. Now, what about if human resources had the tools in front of them, the compensation tools, to reach out to that manager? Hey, you've got a couple of performers that are top performers according to their last reviews, and they've been here 5 years. They're still below the competitive midpoint of their range. That's what they left for. I can't tell you, back in my corporate career, I would have managers come to me and say, our pay ranges aren't high enough. And I'd start to ask a few questions. And I would ask, what did they leave for? They left for $85,000 a year. Guess what? That's our midpoint. So even though the employee had been there 5 years, the managers hadn't looked as a way to develop them to get them more pay. Development and pay needs to be linked
That's really good.
closer.
Really
Yeah.
good.
And that can be transparent.
Yeah. Yeah. That makes sense. Um, how do you see compensation evolving in the next few years? And when you're looking ahead into the future and kind of what's happening with the market, and there's a lot of movement with employees between companies, but also there's going to be probably a lot more movement in terms of um, different kinds of jobs that are going to be needed and other jobs that might not be needed. How do you see things shifting in your field?
Well, they've already shifted, and you hinted at this, Andrea, earlier. They've shifted in the sense that obviously uh, there's a lot of workers out in America who have fought very hard to influence their municipalities to pay more for, from the minimum wage jobs to push those jobs up to $15, $16 an hour. So that has an impact because that's not what the market is necessarily saying that should be paid for that job. But if a municipality goes ahead and decides to increase their wages, more power to them and more power to these employees. But it can have an impact on that
Absolutely.
aspect, what they get paid in the market, and it could create issues. They're not worried about it, but I'm certainly worried about that. There's the issue of transparency. We're never going to get to a point where we're going to post the actual salary of individuals by name across the company, because that creates so many more questions than answers and gets everybody upset because people get paid differently for different skill sets, for different things that they bring to the table, and based on business need. But nevertheless, transparency. I think what's happening now, just posting these broad ranges, and the employee thinks, okay, I'm making 50,000. That range is from 40,000 to 80,000. but what does that mean to me? It's kind of a dead end. So you're going to see that with these new quote transparency laws, which really don't tell you a whole lot, in my opinion, the need to answer those questions that employees have. And then the other big one looming out there is artificial intelligence.
Yeah.
Now, like so many people, the kind of work that I do is, thought based, and uh, it could be very conceivable that someone could, type in, "This is my location, this is my job," and everything, and all these different factors that I do,
Mm.
and a computer could do them. The only thing that is kind of a saving grace for me in that regard as to where this goes is I don't know how long it's going to take for people to be totally comfortable with not talking to a human being about the things that we've been talking about. Okay.
And you
That's
you
one
you also add a level of strategy that a computer doesn't necessarily.
so far, or as much as we think, but
Yeah.
they're
Yeah,
working on,
sure, sure.
they're working on minimizing as much as possible that human interaction. This goes across very
Mm.
uh, different aspects of the industry. So
It
AI,
requires the inputs. So they have to know what to look for to put into you know what I mean?
but keep in mind one thing, like I said earlier, Andrea, human resources, a lot of companies out there struggle to even get a truly top-notch human resources information system to house their data.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
They use a payroll system which has a little add-on for compensation, but they don't have a lot of people out there. Again, that's where I come in because I'm able to manipulate data in my own formats to get them quick information that they can grab onto and make decisions from that they don't have from an HR. So if they're struggling to get money for a really good HRIS workday system, I imagine that they're not going to be at the top of the list for a new AI system right away. And I'm getting on in life, I'm not a young man anymore. So we'll have to see how it all shakes out.
So you mentioned the minimum wage increase.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if you have an opinion or an expert, perspective on how a company, in particular small companies, I think the smaller companies are having a harder time knowing how to handle the fact that wages are increasing. How should that impact everybody else?
Yeah, it's definitely a growing concern, as I said, because think of it this way: there are a lot of jobs that people do out there that don't have the type of skills that pay a lot in the marketplace. And one of the things that you find small companies, you mentioned small companies doing, say they have openings for a contact center representative. But they're not just competing with contact center representatives in the next company down the road. They're competing for people that might be warehouse workers or fast food workers that are getting paid the same thing, and they're willing to switch out of what they're doing to go to another job that pays $1 more an hour.
Yep.
So it's not just about competing. This is one of the big issues, I think, with small companies. It's just not competing apples to apples
Mm-hmm.
um, from someone, a call center agent, and that call center agent says, "Hey, down the street, I can make $1 more working in a warehouse." Now, some people would prefer to do call center. Some people would prefer to do, but at this level, money is a crucial concern to these types of
Yeah.
employees.
Yeah.
So that is one big impact. And one of the things, again, I always look at things from a compensation perspective. So what can I do to retain those people? And what I often suggest, it's getting a little bit detailed, but you might have a step pay plan where instead of giving someone a one-time pay increase, hourly pay increase for their performance every 6 months that they stay with the company, they might get a hourly rate hike because for retention purposes. Totally legitimate. because there's a huge cost to losing people.
Yep.
Some companies have huge turnover, and a lot of it you can't prevent because of the type of the role it is and how much it pays, and people can go out and seek other things. So with small companies, I think those are the big issues with this, not apples to apples. You're recruiting from different populations, and if one raises it $1, you know, that has the impact. And the other thing is that there are some corporate jobs that, don't pay a lot much more than what some of the top uh, minimum wage rates are in the
Mhm.
country. Now, again, it's not uniform. Nationally, it can vary. We have a fairly low, I'm in Florida, we have a fairly low minimum wage. But other places like state of Washington, of course, much, much higher, and in California. So it's a concern when it's not so much of a concern if you're offering a long-term career, a professional role that might not initially pay much more than some of these higher paying minimum wage because you're offering an opportunity to move up in the organization. You, of course, can talk about the benefits program that you have and some of that gets back to the total reward statement that I was talking about. But nevertheless, it can start to create, it's like an artificial market. And I have worked with companies who employ teacher aides. And the same thing kind of happens. The teacher aide is not a teacher, it's a teacher's aide. Okay. The requirements are much less. But you may want to pay them uh, $15 an hour as a teacher's aide, and they can get $16 an hour at McDonald's in their location. So again, that's a specific thing, the kind of thing that I've experienced and that I must continue to work. I haven't completely wrapped my head around it because it's affecting more and more areas, but it's something I'm certainly aware of.
Hmm. Yeah. Well, this has been really an interesting conversation. I want to give people a chance to know where they can contact you or find out information about you, Scott. Can you share with us where to look?
Yeah, absolutely. One area would be LinkedIn. I have my profile out on LinkedIn. So that would be a good place. I don't know if you've been given any of my immediate contact information, such as my email and my phone number, that I'm absolutely comfortable with being shared.
Okay.
I'm a member of the Better Business Bureau. If someone went out, for example, and they really wanted to know about me, I would say go to the Better Business Bureau of Southeast Florida and the Caribbean. The reason I mention that is because I've been a member for many years. I had to get certified by them. I stand behind my work. Some people think of Better Business Bureau as kind of old fashioned, but to me, what it says as a client is, hey, he's willing to put his work to subject to criticism. And also, if they go out there, they can see testimonials of my work and see the type of projects that I work, and that might give them some ideas. But definitely LinkedIn, my email address, telephone number, and I also have a website, which is www.hrcompensationconsulting.com. Haven't done too many updates in it, but that can give a good gist of who I am as well. But I love direct email, direct phone call. I'm happy to talk to anyone. Usually it's a human resources person that reaches out to me.
Okay. We will link to all of those things that you mentioned in the show notes. And then people can just go there if they want to come and look for information about you, Scott. So, one last question for you, though. This
Sure.
is the Voice of Influence podcast. What last piece of advice would you want to give somebody to have a voice of influence?
Have passion. Passion is the drive because if you have passion for what you do, um, this I always say my company was founded on passion. That's right in my and it's sustained by principle. But when you have passion for what you do, you can move mountains. And what you need to do if you want to be a voice of influence, you have to do some soul searching and you have to figure out how can you turn your passion into something, into digestible uh, tools that can be a benefit to other people, but never lose your passion. I got into being an independent consultant because I wanted to demonstrate that passion. If someone wants to demonstrate their passion within an organization, um, they first need to feel that inside of themselves. And if they don't have it, then they need to think about how do I get that? Because we spend, as you know this, Andrea. So we spend so much of our time working in different capacities. I mean, to make it seem more like a hobby, I think that's very important. If you want to be a voice of influence, you got to have passion. It helps everything. It helps your presentation. I think it makes you'll make mistakes along the way, but I think people take you more seriously if you manage it right. You don't go overboard. Um, and I think you gain respect by that. So you have to demonstrate it in your work. I think that's very important.
Mm, that's great advice. Well, thank you so much, Scott, for being a voice of influence today.
Thank you so much, Andrea. It's a pleasure.